This is Professor Gavor, and we're going to talk about inventory control models today. In the first couple weeks of this class, we've been talking about model building. So this is kind of like module 1 of the course where we talk about model building, and this will be the last module, the model that we talk about, inventory control. Why inventory control, you ask? Well, I think a lot of students don't know much about inventory planning and inventory sizing and what inventory turns and days coverage are. And it's a topic that's important to me in my career, so I decided to add it to the class. And I think it's an interesting topic that everybody needs to know something about. So we're going to cover the introduction through the single period inventory models. You might want to read ahead in the book on ABC analysis. It's interesting, but we're not going to cover that or the next section 610 through 613. We're just going to go to 6.9. So inventory is important and can be an expensive asset to many companies. We all have inventory. We have inventory in our houses. You buy soup. If you go to Costco, you buy soup 24 cans at a time. If you go someplace else, you only might buy a few cans, and you store the inventory in your pantry. Well, stores are the same way. Inventory is related to any stored resource to use to satisfy a current or future need. That's why you buy stuff at stores and keep it in your house. And that's the same reason companies either buy raw and packed materials or subassemblies, or store finished goods, or store other materials that may not be necessarily part of production. So like we just said, common examples are the raw materials, packing materials, and subassemblies, or maybe even finished goods you buy from a third party. That's all incoming inventory. Once the raw and packaging material is transacted into the factory, it's considered work in process. You're adding value to the materials by the manufacturing process. So you're turning bits of plastic and perhaps inks and bits of metal and whatnot into a ballpoint pen. You're turning bits of nylon or strings of nylon and other plastics into toothbrushes. But it's all work in process until it's transacted out of the factory, and then it's considered a finished good, even though it's a finished good in the factory itself. Most companies, you want to have enough inventory to be able to satisfy your sales. And the kind of companies we're talking about here are mostly make-to-stock companies. There are companies that are make-to-order. In other words, what's the difference? Make-to-order company is like a General Dynamics submarine division. They make nuclear submarines for the U.S. Navy. The U.S. Navy comes to buy a submarine. The General Dynamics people don't say, we got 12 of them back there on the lot, with these interiors and these exterior colors. No, they don't make a submarine until the U.S. government actually orders one. Make to order. So your inventory there is mostly raw and pack and work in process. When the submarine is finished, it's a unique finished good and delivered to the U.S. Navy customer that they have. Most consumer packaged goods companies are make to stock. We anticipate we're going to have so many sales, and I can't make every product every day, so I'm going to build inventories of finished goods to satisfy the needs of the consumers. So forecasting plays an important role, and not surprisingly, the next 2 weeks we're going to talk about forecasting. So I'm making to stock. I'm making an anticipation of sales. I have finished good warehouses. I want to have the right amount of the right products in the right place at the right time with the right quality to satisfy any customer order. And I want to do that at the lowest possible cost with the highest possible quality. So the lowest possible cost includes how much inventory I actually store. So the lower the inventory, obviously the lower my cash investment. But if the two things, having a little bit too much inventory or not enough, I'd rather err on the side of having a little bit too much. Because if you run out of something and salespeople have sold it, they get quite upset, as do the C-level executives. Most CPG companies, consumer packaged goods companies, don't operate on a back order system anymore. So losing sales are not a good thing, even though the plan is you'll catch it the next time they order. And large companies are ordering weekly, if not daily, from other large companies. So low inventory levels result in stockouts and dissatisfied customers and dissatisfied salespeople and C-level executives in your own company. Too much inventory, and you're going to get the attention of the finance and accounting people, mostly because when you ask for, we need more warehouse space to store all the goods that we seem to have. Most organizations have some sort of inventory control system. With the advent of SAP and Oracle and other ERP systems, that has gotten quite sophisticated. Inventory planning helps to determine whether organizations produce the goods or services, or whether they're purchased from another organization, outsourced, if you will. Inventory planning also involves demand forecasting. You're going to find out that forecasting, which is predicting the future, is the Achilles heel of all supply chain and operations management. So, what's involved in inventory planning and control? Planning on what inventory to stock and how to acquire it. Forecasting parts demands and parts and product demand. And then actually placing the orders from things that you're going to buy from the outside and scheduling the production for what you're going to produce yourself. And you then want to control the inventory levels. You want to look at what you have on hand, what you have on order, and that will determine what you need to make. So you have feedback from controlling the inventory levels to revise plans and forecasts. So inventory planning is related very heavily to manufacturing planning, and it's related very heavily to demand forecasting. So here's the 5 uses of inventory. The decoupling function, obviously storing resources. Irregular supply and demand. If there's a lot of variation in the demand or in the supply, you want to cover inventory to buffer you during those irregular periods. And many products do have irregular standard deviations of demand or supply. You may buy more because you get a quantity discount. I mean, I might go to Costco and buy 2 big jars of mayonnaise shrink wrapped together because that's how Costco sells them. But I've got like 2.5 years of mayonnaise supply because of that. Same thing at Costco if you buy AA, AAA batteries. You buy 70 at a time for only twice as much as what it costs you to buy 4 of them, or 5 of them, or 8 of them at Walgreens or CVS. So if you get a quantity discount, you may buy more. Then it's dependent on you to take care of the inventory. And part of that is, when I think of the batteries, I think of, we used to buy big sleeves of batteries when my kids were living at home. And all of a sudden the batteries would be all gone, and yet their devices would still be needing batteries. And only later did I find out that they were evenly distributed in the desk drawers of my eldest child, my son. So the other thing you want to do is avoid stockouts and shortages. You want to make sure that if someone orders something and you're a make to stock company, you have the goods in stock so you don't lose sales. The decoupling process, the function that you talked about first, it's used as a buffer between stages in a manufacturing process. This helps reduce delays and improves efficiencies. You might put inventory where you think you might have a bottleneck, or you might run out of stock, or you might have irregular demand. just to make sure that when everything is running properly, you have plenty of materials and plenty of inventory to build whatever it is you have to build. Storing resources, we talked about that. Seasonal products may be stored to satisfy off-seasonal demand. Materials can be stored as raw materials, work in process, or finished goods. We talked about that. Labor can be stored as a component of partially completed subassemblies. Grocery stores are nothing but warehouses that stock inventory. And you go there and do the selection yourself, but it's basically a really nice, plush-looking, inviting, well-designed, eye-appealing warehouse where inventory is stored. If you go to many stores, if you think of the clothing industry, right now the stores are chock full of fall and winter clothing, but come around January after the holiday season, stores will be looking to have sales to empty all that inventory. They don't want to store their seasonal goods for next year because they'll have all new designs, so they'll run sales to get rid of whatever didn't sell over Christmas and make room on their warehouses, their end warehouses, which are their stores, for all the spring and summer fashions, which will be coming in probably sometime in March, late February or March. Compensate for irregular demand. I think we already talked about that pretty well. Quantity discounts we talked about, and avoid stockouts and shortages. I think we've already discussed that as well. So there's two basic decisions in controlling inventory. And when I say how much to order, this is assuming I'm ordering it from another entity, a third-party supplier, a raw and packaging material supplier. But it's also how much to produce. If I'm ordering it from my own factory for finished goods, how much should I put in the production plan? And then how often or when to order. The major objective is to minimize total inventory cost. What are the costs? The cost of the items. So it costs you a certain amount to purchase materials that are coming into your factory, raw pack and subassemblies or finished goods. So you negotiate that ahead of time. And it really is not going to play a large part in what we do unless they have volume discounts, which we'll talk about later. What's the cost of placing an order? And while it sounds like it's very simple, I could go order a book on Amazon. It takes me like a minute if I know the book I want, and I just go there, boom, 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 and it's done. There's a convenience there. But sometimes doing the analysis to decide how much to order and how many people are involved in a corporate setting to do this, it's a non-trivial cost. It can be hundreds of dollars. And what's the cost of carrying or holding the inventory? Do I buy all the inventory I think I'm going to need for 1 year? Well, that inventory takes up a certain amount of space in the warehouse, and it has to pay rent in that warehouse. So cost of ordering and cost of holding inventory are the two big things that we're going to look at in this chapter. The cost of a stockout is the cost of lost sales. And like I said, you will irritate the sales and C-level executives by running out of stock with any frequency. Other things that you can look at, here's the ordering cost factors: developing and sending purchase orders out, processing, inspecting incoming inventory, bill paying, inventory inquiries, utilities, phone bills, and so on for the purchasing department, salaries and wages for the purchasing department employees, supplies such as forms and paper for the purchasing department, even though no one uses that anymore. But if you look at the bottom of the slide, it says 2012. Even then, no one was using it. Everything is done online now. Cost of carrying the inventory is the cost of capital. How much does your money cost you? It costs you cash to build inventory. You spent money to build that inventory. You pay taxes. You have insurance for that inventory in case there's a flood, a fire, whatever. Spoilage, if it's a perishable inventory, you have to plan for that. Theft, believe it or not, things disappear from warehouse. They call it shrinkage usually, not theft. Theft is part of it. The other part of shrinkage is We're not sure where we put it. We know we have it, but we can't find it. If you have the warehouse the size of a football field, that can easily be done, even though with modern warehouse management systems and ERP systems, it happens less and less. If you build too much product, store too much product, and it becomes obsolete, it's past its sell-by date. It's a product that you no longer sell. You already replaced it with something else. The salary and wages for the warehouse people, the utilities for the warehouse, and all the supplies that you might need in a warehouse, including lift trucks and batteries for lift trucks and racking and all of that such stuff. So here's what we're saying. Ordering costs are generally independent of ordering quantity. All the costs that go into placing an order, if I order 10 or I order 1,000 or I order 10,000, it's just a matter of what number I type in. The amount of work is the same no matter the size of the order. Carrying costs generally vary with the amount of inventory or the order size. One of the things for carrying costs, you look at how much space does a product take up, and you can allocate the annual warehouse costs to that product based on the amount of space it takes up. Or what a lot of companies do will take the cost of the product and assign a fixed percentage, like 5 or 10 or 15 or 25% of the cost of the material or finished good, and make that the holding cost for a year. So both practices are used, and you'll see that in later examples. The actual cost of the items can vary if there are quantity discounts available. So we're going to next look at something. The first model we're going to look at is the base model of this. It's called the economic order quantity, EOQ. It's the oldest and most commonly known inventory control techniques. All other inventory models for make to stock are built off of this. Okay? And I can't emphasize that enough. This is the base model from which everything else is built on. You'll hear people in industry saying, why do you still cover that in an operations management course or a quantitative analysis course? Well, it's the assumptions are limiting, but it is the base model from which everything else is built. And we'll expand on it a little bit today. It's easy to use and has a number of important assumptions or limiting assumptions. The objective is to minimize total cost of inventory. Here are the assumptions. Demand is known and constant. Well, gee whiz, I really wish that were true for all products that I ever had to forecast. The lead time is known and constant. Gee whiz, I really wish that was known and constant for all things. In most time, demand is a normal distribution. It's a mean and a standard deviation. Lead time is a mean and standard deviation, but as soon as we try to model those, the amount of the formulas and the math get quite complicated. Receipt of inventory is instantaneous. That doesn't always happen either. If you run out of toilet paper, it doesn't just show up when you need it. You got to actually plan to go get it from the store. So, but this is the assumption here. We're going to have instantaneous. The models are limiting, so we have to know what assumptions we're putting into the model and how that limits the reality. We can still use it, but we have to know that we're not going to. We might have to reorder before we run out to zero. The only variable costs are the costs of placing an order, ordering costs, and the cost of holding the inventory or storing the inventory, the rent the inventory pays. That's called it holding or carrying costs. And these are constant through the year, so they don't change. Why not the actual purchase price of the items? We assume that's already been negotiated and it's fixed for the year. The fact that we know that the demand is known and constant and we've negotiated a price, we know that that's a sunk cost already. Orders are placed so that stockouts or shortages are avoided completely. This comes all the way back to 1913. Here's the header from the original paper by Ford Harris, which I was confused with Harrison Ford. I don't know why. Well, I guess I know why. It's obvious. How many parts to make at once? Notice that he wasn't talking about how many orders, to make how many products to order at a single time. But it's the same problem, whether you're ordering it from your own factory, which means scheduling it in the production, or ordering it from a supplier. You still have a preparation cost, a setup cost for production, and you have a order placement cost for a supplier, and then you still have the holding costs that you have to look at, and the standard cost of the product is probably set for the year, so you have that. And this was done in 1913, so it's 105 years ago, or 106 years ago, when this model was created by Ford W. Harris. And all inventory models from make to order are derivative off this original model. And here's what it looks like. Inventory comes down at a very smooth level. Of course, it doesn't happen that way. It jiggles and juggles and jaggeds and because of demand variation, but we're assuming a very smooth demand. It goes down to zero, it's replenished, you draw it down again to zero, you replenish, and you always replenish with a fixed quantity. And that's the maximum inventory level. And of course, this axis is time, this axis is inventory. So this sawtooth model is kind of how you think inventory should run all the time. The average inventory, if you look at this, is the maximum is Q, the minimum is 0. So half of that is your average inventory because you're drawing it down at a constant rate. So your average inventory is Q over 2, and Q being the ordering quantity. So if we look at computing average inventory, we've done that. So you have April 1 beginning and ending, the average was 9 because they take the average of those. April 2nd, the beginning and end was the average of that. That's another way of taking the average. But we're using the Q over 2, which is what we'll use for most of the problems that you'll have in this section. So inventory costs in the EOQ situation. Q, number of pieces to order. That's the only variable in the model. EOQ is Q star, which is the optimal number of pieces to order. D is the annual demand in units, which we know already, surprisingly, and it's fixed. CO is the ordering cost. CH is the holding cost. So the annual ordering cost is the number of orders placed per year times the ordering cost. So the ordering cost is CO. So if the demand is D and I divide by Q, the amount I order each time, that will tell me how many. So if I have my demand is 1,000 and I order 250 each time, I'm going to place 4 orders per year, so 4 times the cost of ordering. If I look at my inventory holding costs, same variables, they haven't changed. But my holding cost now is average inventory times the carrying cost per year, because I don't know exactly how much inventory I'm going to have, so I'm going to go on average. I take my Q, which is my average order quantity, and remember the sawtooth thing where we just keep drawing it down nicely to 0, times the holding cost. So if my average order is 250, like we said, if that ends up being the optimal amount, half of that is 125 times the holding cost. So that will be my holding cost. If you look at the carrying cost, which is linear, and the ordering cost, which is nonlinear. If we go back, remember Q is the only variable. This is a 1 over X kind of equation because Q is in a denominator. Here Q is the only variable, and it's a line that goes through 0. So it's a line that goes through 0. The bigger the order, the more my average inventory, the higher my holding cost, and the total cost is the sum of those two. And I want to find that minimum point. So they've not given us the entire equation here, but notice that we didn't do the cost of the product. There's no variable. The amount I order, the ordering size, doesn't have any bearing on D times cost per unit, my annual demand times the cost per unit. So it's like I said, it's a sunk cost. According to the graph, when the EOQ assumptions are met, total cost is minimized when annual ordering cost equals annual holding cost, right? Well, we're taking a graph for granted. Normally you'd have to do a calculus, solve a calculus equation to do this, but let's go with their assumption here. So here's when these two things are equal. Do the math. Multiply both sides by Q to get Q out of the denominator. So you have 2 times, and multiply both sides by 2, so you get rid of all denominators. So I have 2D times the ordering cost equals Q squared times the holding cost, divide by the holding cost, and that equals 2D sees the carrying cost divided by the holding cost equals the quantity squared. To get my EOQ, I take the square root of that. So I have 2 times the annual demand times the ordering cost divided by the holding cost equals my EOQ. So here's a summary of equations. Annual ordering cost, annual holding cost, EOQ. So if you do EOQ problem right, the ordering cost and the holding cost should be exactly the same. So here's a Sumco pump company. They sell pump housings to other companies. The firm would like to reduce their inventory costs by finding an optimal order quantity. Their annual demand is 1,000, and believe me, textbook problems are so nice, everything works out well. In reality, nothing comes out this nice. Ordering costs are $10 per order, and it costs 50 cents to carry an item of pump housing in inventory for the entire year. It's not so much unless you're holding 50,000 pump housings in inventory on average, and then it's going to cost you something like $25,000. So if you just plug the numbers into the equation, there's the demand is 1,000, the ordering cost is 10, and 50 cents for the holding cost comes out to the square root of $40,000 or 200 units. If I go and calculate my 2 ordering costs and holding costs, it comes out to 50 plus 50 equals 100. Very naive and simple model, of course. Now, in QM, and I'll provide an example of doing one of these kinds of problems, maybe this exact one, in I'll do it in Excel using QM. You want to use QM where you can here because it makes the models easier. And this model building kind of, even though we're only doing it for one SKU at a time, it's basically what an ERP system would do for your 20,000 inventory items, all at the same time. You put in the annual demand rate, you put in the setup cost, you put in the holding cost. And if you look in the book, this is the fixed amount holding cost. We're going to talk about where it's a percentage later. And here's the equations that you use to come up with the optimal inventory quantity, the maximum inventory, the average inventory, the number of orders placed per year, the holding cost, the setup cost, and the unit cost if you put the unit price in. So those are just the formulas, and they're the basic formulas that we've already talked about. You just have to make sure that if you want to convince yourself, which I don't believe anybody really wants to do that, they just trust the system. So if you put the numbers in, okay, demand rate 10,000, setup cost is 10, 50 cents for a holding cost. The optimal order quantity is 200. The maximum inventory is 200. The average is half that, or 100. 200 into 1,000, we place 5 orders per year. Both the holding costs and setup costs are equal. They're $50 each. We didn't put the unit cost in, so there's nothing there. So all we add up is the $250 and get $100 for the total cost. So total inventory cost can be written to include the cost of the purchased items. So what's the cost times the quantity that you buy divided by 2? That's your average dollar level. Given the EOQ assumptions, the annual purchase cost is constant, D times C, no matter what the order policy is, where C is the cost per unit, D is the demand. So it doesn't really matter. The interesting thing difference between finance and operations is when it comes to inventory, finance only looks at the value of the inventory, which would be like the average dollar level of inventory, but The supply chain, we don't store dollars, we store units. We're interested in how much space they take up and how many items we actually have in stock, because we have to use actual items. We also need to know their value, but our focus is more on the count of goods, and finance and accounting is looking at the value of the inventory. Another way of looking at it, we talked about the percent, for the holding cost. So if you have the cost of the goods from the previous one, this C, and I is the annual inventory holding charge as a percentage of the unit price or cost, the holding cost equals I times C, so you could replace the equation with this. We look at sensitivity analysis somehow to determine how the EOQ can change. Notice it's a square root. So the ordering cost has to quadruple for the EOQ to double. The holding cost has to go up or down by factors of 4 for the square root. So the square root minimizes, it takes the square root of the number. So because of the square root formula, changes in the inputs result in smaller changes in the order quantity. So if I only change this by a few pennies and this by a few pennies, it's not going to have much impact. I have to, and same thing with demand. If the demand is doubled, it's only going to go up 1.414%. It's going to go up, your inventory is going to go up by a factor of 1.41. It has to quadruple to double. So it's at square law. So in the Sumco pump example, they say, okay, what if my order quantity goes from 10, everything stays the same, order costs go from 10 to 40. Well, it's 200 units, now it goes to 400. But that's a quadrupling of your order cost. Is that really going to happen? Probably means this was not right. So the EOQ changes by the square root of the change of any of the inputs. So now we have to look at a reorder point, because if we remember our sawtooth diagram, we get to 0, and voila, miraculously, miracle of miracles, the product magically appears in my warehouse. And we know that's not the case. So now we want to calculate a reorder point. So I want to look at my daily or weekly demand, small d versus the big D, which is the annual demand. And then what's my lead time? So it doesn't mean if I'm running low of something in the house, I make a note. Oh geez, I made my last peanut butter sandwich, or I'm getting down to the bottom of my peanut butter. What do? I put it on my shopping list, and I know I'm going to go shopping in 2 days. The lead time there is 2 days. If I have that same thought the day I'm going to the store, the lead time is less. Most of the time when we're talking about B2B, business to business, the lead time is more fixed than that. And we're assuming a deterministic lead time of a fixed L, not an L with a mean and a standard deviation, which is probably more realistic. And we have this D times L. So if I say, how long does it take me to get it? And I multiply that lead time in days by the demand, it's going to tell daily demand. It's going to tell me, let's say my lead time is 4 days, and then the product I sell 20 per day. So when I get to 80, I should probably reorder. So when I run out, the new product's there. So the demand for a computer chip is 8,000 per year. Daily demand is 40. It takes 3 working days to replenish for this computer chip. So you take the daily demand of 40 times the 3 days. So when you get to 120 units, no matter what your Q star is, you're going to think about reordering. An order is based on the EOQ calculations placed when the inventory reaches 120. The order arrives just when the other inventory is depleted. Here's a picture of it. Here's reorder point. This is a sawtooth thing. Remember, the assumption still holds that we're drawing down at a constant rate. When you reach the reorder point here, and you have a lead time of L, you will replenish, boom. Now sometimes the lead time is longer, and in a day and age when we're ordering product from Asia, the lead time can be longer. Figure you have a third of your warehouse, a month of coverage in your warehouse, a third of your inventory, another month's coverage on the water on its way to you, and a third of your inventory in production planning of your supplier in Asia. So that means when I reach my reorder point, boom, I'm going to reorder some for the next cycle. I'm going to reorder it. So what arrives first is the stuff that's already on the water, already being shipped to me in transit. But then when that runs out, the next order arrives. Because while this in transit order is coming to me, the company in China is replenishing and shipping. So you have to look at this. There's models where the lead time is in days, and the days is less than this cycle of time it takes you to the cycle time it takes you to run through your inventory. But sometimes the lead times could be longer. I think the model I just talked about from China would have to go 2 cycles for that to happen. The other one is if you are, we talked about this instantaneous replenishment. Well, that's if we're ordering the product from an outside supplier. The full truckload, the full container load of goods comes to you at one time. So you go from whatever you have to adding that full amount. What if you go into manufacturing and your order is not to an outside supplier but to your own manufacturing company? And so you're delivering inventory as you build it, but you're also drawing it down. So while you've gone to 0 or close to 0, you're building up the inventory but drawing off of it. So it's not an instantaneous replenishment. So that's in your production time cycle, T. And then you draw it down nicely. And if you have a reorder point for whatever the lead time to set up the production is, might be here. So, we're going to start producing here. And as you start producing, again, it's not an instantaneous replenishment. It's a constant drawdown by your daily demand away from your daily demand of production, and then you draw down nicely again. So this is the production run model. So if we look at the production run model, instead of ordering costs, we're talking about a setup cost. So Q is the number of pieces per order or production run. CS is the setup cost. CH is the holding cost, again, same as the previous model. P, small p, is the daily production rate. Little d is the daily demand rate. T now, not L, is the length of production run in days. Again, this P, this D, and this T can all be made into, if we want to complicate the model seriously, can all be made into normal random variables with a mean and a standard deviation, which we're not going to talk about very much. We'll look at a few examples of that only. So here's what we got. Maximum inventory, total produced during the production run, minus the total used during the production run. That's going to be your maximum inventory. So the daily production rate times the number of days of production is how much you're going to produce. Daily demand times the number of days of production, so that becomes PT minus DT. The total produced, the quantity is P times T, and the time is Q divided by P. So if we have our maximum inventory, we have PT minus DT, but we know that T is now Q over P. I factor a Q out of this, and this just becomes Q, minus D over P. I factor Q out using the distributive law, and I get Q times 1 minus DP is my maximum inventory level. My average inventory is going to be half of that, and my annual holding cost is going to be that Q over 2 times 1 minus D over P times the holding cost. So I want to set these two equations equal to each other. And my annual setup cost is that now this, my annual ordering cost is now this. And now I set these two things equal to each other and I solve for Q. When I solve for Q, I get this equation. The same thing here, but my holding cost changes because of this factor. So here's the summary of those equations. Annual holding costs, annual setup costs, optimal production quantity. So let's look at another example. This is Brown Manufacturing, makes commercial refrigeration units and batches. The annual demand is 10,000 units. It costs me, every time I decide to produce that product, it costs me $100. Again, the carrying cost is 50 cents. The daily production rate is I can make 80 units per day. And my daily demand rate is 60. Well, that means each day I can only produce 80 of them, and I'm selling 60 each day. I'm only adding 20 to inventory. I'm probably going to have a very long production run to build up any inventory, if you think about it. So how many units should Brown produce? How long should the production part of the cycle last? Here's the equation. They should produce 4,000 units out of 10,000. So they're only going to have a 2.5 production runs a year because they have to run the product a lot because of this thing. 80, they can only produce 80 a day and they sell 60 a day. So to accumulate any kind of inventory, they're only accumulating 20 pieces a day. They have to produce a lot of days. So they're going to produce 4,000 units. The production cycle is going to be 50 days. And they're going to do it 125 days a year. They're going to produce because they're going to get, I think we said they were going to do 2.5 runs a year. So that would be 125 days a year. Out of 365, almost half the days a year they're going to be producing this product. So now you use the production run model, 10,000, their setup costs 100, 50 cents, fixed amount again. Daily production rate 80, daily demand rates 60. Again, we don't need the unit price. Here's the equations that go with it, which you can study this if you so choose. And it gives us 4,000, maximum inventory is 1,000. So you produce for 50 days and only built up 1,000 in inventory. The average inventory is 500. The number of setups, the number of production runs a year is 2.5, as we said. The holding cost and setup cost is 250. And my total inventory cost without the cost of the goods themselves is 500. Now, the other thing that can happen is we can have quantity discounts. If you buy 100, you pay one price. If you buy 101 to 200, you pay a slightly less amount. You order above 200, you pay a third amount. So there's some incentive to buy more because there's a discount involved. I don't know how often this happens. This will affect smaller companies more than it will larger companies. Because if you go to Walmart with something like that and you're a supplier to them and Walmart's like 50% of your business and you offer them, hey, if you buy this much, I'll give you the lower price. They'll say, hey, that's pretty cool. We'll just take the lower price all the time. What are you going to do? They're the big dog in that relationship. So it's more for printing. It's more for lumber, as you'll see some of the examples that we have for smaller entities. So you have the material cost. Now the material cost plays a role in it because you have D times the C. This C is going to change. It's going to change 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times depending on how many levels of discount you have. I'm still solving for Q, but I have to solve this for each price discount. So here's my demand in units, ordering costs, cost per unit, holding costs. So now because the cost is changing, I have to use that percentage times the cost to get my holding costs. So the holding cost is a percentage, is the only way you can do the holding cost in this model. So here's one. Quantity discount model. I buy 0 to $9.99. I get 0 discount, it costs me $5. If I buy 1,000 to 1,999, I get a 4% discount. I get, it costs me $4.80 a unit. And if I order 2,000 or more, my discount rate is 5. And so it's really a big discount rate to go from the first 1,000 to the second, but a very much smaller discount rate to go for the second 1,000. So you can almost guess that the answer is going to be in this range here. So it takes down to 475. So now I've got to really solve this equation at all three of these. And I need to look at the endpoints, because if you see the minimum might be in between here, that's good. But if the minimum's not in the range, then I have to look at the lower endpoint and the upper endpoint for the next one to determine that. So I have to be a little careful. Here's the picture. In the first range, the economic order quantity is what I would use. In the second one, I can't use the economic order quantity because it's not in the range. So I've got to use this point, would be the minimum. And then for the next one, the same thing, because it's going to be in here somewhere, and I would want to look at this point. So you got to look at, not if the economic order quantity minimum is in the range for the curve, you use it. If it's not, you use the endpoints. So you calculate all these things, 700, 714, 718. You see how the price change had very little impact on how many to order? They're all in that 0 to 999 range. But if I really want to get this discount, so I've got to look at the endpoints. So I really want to look at these quantities of 700, 1,000, and 2,000. So now if I look at that, 700, 1,000, and 2,000, and calculate all the prices, you see that it's going to cost me 25,700 if I pay full price. At the price of 480, it's going to cost me 24,725, but I got to order 1,000 of them. And if I want the price of 475, it's going to cost me 24,822. The differences are not that much. This is about $1,000, so $1,000 is certainly worth something. I think the difference between here and here is not much. But let's assume that we want the minimum price, so I would go with this one. Now, of course, why do it by hand when you have QM? You would put your 5,000 in, you would put your holding costs, and you would put your range. All you got to do is put the bottom number of the range. So we have three ranges, 0, 1,000, 2,000. I put in my unit price 5, 4.8, 4.75, and it goes through all these calculations. See the quantity, order quantity, if. It calculates the Q squared first, but then it does an if on that. If it is, use B16. If B16 is greater than B11, use B16. If not, use B11. Where's B11? B11 would be the minimum side of this. So you can look and see how the formulas work if you want to convince yourself. But basically, we come here. And it tells you where the minimum is. Now, it gives you this answer. This is why I want answers in text box. I want you to highlight this in yellow, create a text box out here and say, blah, 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 blah. The answer is 24,725. We're going to order 1,000 at the price of 4.8. I want you to be able to interpret it. Because that's what happens in SAP and Oracle. You have to actually interpret the answers. It doesn't spit out, it doesn't give you a text box answer. So the use of safety stock. Usually from the reorder point to 0 is called safety stock. But sometimes, and we use that to prevent stockouts, sometimes we add an extra safety stock. And the rule of thumb might be, let's say, okay, if I have a really important product in my warehouse and I'm covering 4 weeks of inventory on the average for it, or 2 weeks of inventory on the average because I stock it up for a month of demand at the beginning of the month, so I'm really carrying 2 weeks of inventory. I might add another 3-4 days. I might add another week just to make sure I never run out, especially if it's a high moving product. So the basic reorder point equation is D times L. We talked about that before. But now they want to add safety stock. They want to add even more safety stock to that. And they want to add another buffer or cushion. So that I don't want to have a stock out if the demand is a little bit high and my product doesn't get there in time. I want to carry this extra safety stock to not have these stock outs. And the stock out would be avoided because they take the whole sawtooth thing and raise it up by the safety stock. So there's ROP with known stockout costs. With a fixed EOQ system and an ROP for placing orders, stockouts can only occur during lead time. Our objective, we're trying to find the safety stock quantity that will minimize the total cost of stockout and holding cost. We need to know the stockout cost per unit and the probability distribution of demand during the lead time. All of a sudden, we're adding probability, but only during the lead time, which is strange. Estimating stockout costs can be difficult as there may be direct and indirect costs involved. These models can get quite complicated. We're going to look at a couple varieties of them. There are many situations when stockout costs are unknown. An alternative known we look at here that we're going to study is looking at the service level. A service level is a percent of time you will not be out of stock. Stockout cost is very economics and financing. Providing a certain service level is very unit oriented and what manufacturing and operations management people will look at. We want to find out if we want to provide during that lead time, we want to provide 95 or 99% service level. In other words, 1 minus that is your stockout. So the probability of stockout is 1 minus the service level. So we really want to look at the service level. And so the safety stock is equal to the standard deviation of the demand during the lead time. And we multiply it by the standard normal Z factor, which is the number of standard deviations for a given service level. And if we look at the next slide, what it's saying is how many standard deviations. So we got this. The mean demand during lead time is 350. The standard deviation is 10. So X is the mean plus the safety stock. So we want to have 350 should be our reorder point. But how much more should we add? I want to add the safety stocks that gets me to this X. This is only a 50% service level. So I want to go, how many standard deviations do I want to be above it so that I only have a 5% stock out. So 95% of the time is my service level. Well, you can look at the table, you can find all these numbers, and you can find out that you need not 350, but 367 units. 370 units of safety stock to cover this. Why not just go for 100? Well, the normal distribution goes off to infinity. So to get 100%, it would cost you a lot of money. Most people try to go to 98 or 99%. Different safety stock levels will generate different service levels. The relationship is not linear. You should be aware that service level is costing in terms of carrying the safety stock in excess inventory. So if you look at it here, the service levels, if you want to get to 99.99%, your Z factor goes up to 3.72. And here's a useful table if you're going to do this by hand. You specify the service level and it gives you the multiplier. So for 95, the Z factor is 1.65. At 99 is 2.33. At 99.99 is 3.72. For each 9 I add, it probably gets bigger faster. But so 99.99% service is probably pretty darn good for what most people use. And you might want to use this for pharmaceuticals, maybe another 9 for pharmaceuticals. But in this range, most consumer packaged goods would be content with this range. And here's the graph. If you take the service level up, and your inventory carrying costs are not linear anymore. They go up exponentially, kind of. So to get to 100%, it would be quite costly. So there's 3 things to consider here. Demand is variable, but lead time is constant. Demand is constant, but lead time is variable. Both demand and lead time are variable. I don't know, I have problems that cover all of these, so probably only one of them. So the ROP, calculating lead time, demand, and standard deviation. When demand is variable, but lead time is constant. So lead time is constant, the demand is variable. So it's the ROP is the same Z factor, but it's only the standard deviation of this demand. D bar is the average daily demand. That's the standard deviation of that daily demand. And why do they use sigma, which is a system, it's a population parameter and not the statistic S, even though they're calling this D bar. It should really be mu times D. Well, you've looked at it over enough time, over enough period, that you know what it is. If you have over 30, 40 data points, you can just assume it's a population. And I think that's what they do here. And L is the lead time. If you do it the other way, where lead time is a variable, again, L bar is average lead times, sigma sub L is the standard deviation of lead time, D is the daily demand. It's instead of which one is constant and which one is standard deviation, which one is a parameter, which one is standard deviation, changes. If they're both, well, now you got D bar times L bar, but when you add standard deviations, you have to square them first. Okay, and that means you have to square the L bar here, which is not right, they didn't square it, and add the standard deviations, then take the square root to get the standard deviation of the joint distribution. Don't worry your head about it, because we will probably, if you have a problem, you're going to use QM, and it makes it easier to do. So here's a problem. Suppose that for product SKU F5402, whatever that is, daily demand is normally distributed with a mean of 15 units and a standard deviation of 3. Lead time is exactly 4 days. Well, that's a blessing. To maintain a 97% service level, what is the ROP? And how much safety stock should be carried? Well, ROP is, you use that formula where the daily demand is variable and the lead time is constant. So you put all the numbers in there, and notice they use 4, so the square root of 4 is very nice. And you get 71.28. So the average demand during the lead time is 60. So the safety stock, additional safety stock you're carrying is like 12 units. You probably want to round those up because you can't carry 11.3 units. If you do it the other way, the Hinsdale company, they have an SKU, and their daily demand is constant at 25, but the lead time is normally distributed with a mean of 6 days and a standard deviation of 3. You see what happens here. To maintain a 98% service level, and here's where they're using, in both cases, that number off the table. QM would find it for you. You don't have to worry your heads about that. So I fill in all the numbers again, and I get 303. Since the mean was 150, and we're carrying 153 items of safety stock. So that's a huge safety stock relative to the actual mean. We're almost doubling the inventory during that lead time. But it has to do with the standard deviation. Now, if both of them move at the same time, let's see, where am I at? Both of them move at the same time. Here's another SKU. Daily demand is normally distributed with a mean of 20 and a standard deviation of 4. The lead time is normally distributed with a mean of 5, standard deviation of 2. And you're trying to maintain now 94%. No one uses 94%. They use numbers like 95, 97, 98, 98.5, 99, 99.5, 99.9. They don't use 94, but that's okay. It's a textbook. You just plug all the numbers in again, and there you get your number. So calculating annual holding costs with safety stock. Under the standard assumptions of EOQ, the average inventory is Q over 2. So the holding cost is C over 2 times age. It's not the case when we're using safety stock. So you got to carry your safety stock. A total holding cost is order quantity, holding costs. So that's the base equation. See, they say they keep adding on to the base 1913 equation of Ford Harris. Here's a perfect example of that. Here's the safety stock you calculated, and you multiply that by the holding costs, and you add it to get the THC, which in the world of cannabis, I think means something completely different than total holding costs. So here's a model where you can do that. Average demand during lead time, standard deviation of demand, service levels. It calculates, these are your only inputs, it calculates everything else. Notice to get the Z value, it takes a norm, inverse norm, and calculates that, and then you put the data, average daily demand, standard deviation of daily demand. So when it's 0, you can pick which model to use by putting zeros in for the standard deviations. If you put non-zero numbers in for both, it uses the dual model. So here, it will calculate all this stuff and spit out your answers for you. The result gives you the Z value, gives you the average demand during lead time, standard deviation during lead time, and it gives you the safety stock and the reorder point. So you can do that. Now the last thing we want to cover here is a single period inventory model. This is in QM. I really don't recommend you use it because it gives funky answers. I'm not sure why. I've not looked deeply enough to determine that. This is called a news vendor or single period inventory model. And when it means news vendor, when it's newspapers are perishable inventory. If I don't sell them today, they're worthless tomorrow. I return them. I don't sell them. And sometimes the news vendor has to pay for the number of papers he gets, and if he gets too many, he runs out of stock. Or he has excess inventory and he has to eat the cost of the papers. And if he doesn't get enough, he's missed revenue. Also, clothing stores use this. They order twice a year. They order their fall and winter sweaters and their spring and summer polo shirts. And they have to guess 3 months before the season starts or before the product has to be in a store, 3-4 months, how much they need to order. So if they have too much, and I count on them having too much, that's why I buy during the sales and get deep discount. Or if they run out of stock on a popular color, they're losing sales. So analysis involves marginal profit and marginal loss. So this is a marginal analysis way of looking at it. With a manageable number of states of nature and alternatives, discrete distributions can be used. Where there is a large number of alternatives or states of nature, the normal distribution can be used. We're only looking at the discrete level here. So there's two things. We stock an additional unit only if the expected marginal profit of that unit exceeds the expected marginal loss. P is the probability that demand will be greater than or equal to the given supply, or the probability of selling at least one additional unit. 1 minus P is the probability that demand will be less than supply, or the probability of selling that one unit. It's confusing until you see a picture of it. The expected marginal profit is probability times marginal profit. The expected marginal loss is 1 minus P marginal loss. So we want the probability times marginal profit to be greater than 1 minus the probability of marginal loss. If you solve this equation for P and go through the steps, you'll end up with, I want to find the probability where the marginal loss divided by, is greater than the marginal loss plus marginal profit. That would be a viable point at which to stock. And you keep looking at that until P is no longer greater than this number. So determine this value for the problem. Construct a probability table and add a cumulative probability column. Keep ordering inventory as long as the probability of selling at least one additional unit is greater than that. Okay, how does it look? Here's Cafe Do Donut. And here's how you should do these. The one problem I would assign like this. Buys donuts each day for $4 per carton of 2 dozen donuts at a time. Any cartons not sold are thrown away at the end of the day. So your marginal loss is going to be $4. For any carton you throw away. If a carton is sold, the revenue is $6. So the marginal profit is 2, and the marginal loss is 4. So here's some history that they've kept. When I buy 4 cartons, the probability that demand will be at this level is 5%. The probability when I buy 5 cartons, at 5 cartons, the demand will be 15%, 6, 15%, 7, 20%, 8, 25%, and then at 9 and 10, the probability is 10%. So we have this discrete distribution that adds up to 1. So I do this calculation. Determine the value of ML plus ML divided by ML plus P for the decision rule. So it's 4 divided by 4 plus 2. 4 divided by 6 is 2/3. It's 0.66666 forever. Rounded off to 0.67. Add a new column in the table to reflect the probability that donut sales will be at each level or greater. So it's a backwards cumulative distribution. Usually when we do cumulative, we start up here, we go 5%. The next one is 5 plus 15, which is 20. Add another 15, it goes this way. No, this way, start at the bottom, 10%. Now, what's the probability that I will sell 9 or greater, or that I will be here? It becomes 10 plus 10 is 20. This one becomes 20 plus 25, 45. So you add this all up. Well, this is greater than 66. This is greater than 66 or 67. This is greater than 66 or 67. This is pretty much a tie, but according to the strict rule, we want to order 6 cartons. That would be the optimal amount to grow on this probability distribution. And I think that may be the last thing we cover here. So yeah, keep ordering additional cartons as long as the probability of selling at least 1 additional carton is greater than P, which is the indifference probability. So at 6, 80 is greater than 67. This is pretty close, but again, following the strict rule, that's how it works. So that's the end of this presentation. I hope it helped you, and I'll post some videos as well on solving a few of these kinds of problems. Maybe I'll go through the exact examples that we went through in this PowerPoint and show how you would solve it. Okay, thank you very much, and we'll talk to you again soon.